Okay, I'll start now. Welcome to Animated God damn it, Airhammer.
Sorry.
Take 2. Welcome to Animated Indulgence, where grown men talk cartoons. This week we'll be in this episode we'll be talking. In this episode we'll be. God damn it.
Take 3.
Okay, you're muted. Thank God. In this episode we'll be talking about Gundam Wing. That's where you're supposed to chime in there, Hammer. And now I can hear it. I'm pretty sure it's a fan now that I can hear it.
Hold on.
Oh dear.
What a wonderful
Starting
start.
off strong.
Okay.
Starting off so strong.
Do you want to start off from scratch?
Now let's make this the whole intro. Now we can start again if we want to.
Okay, so welcome to Animated Indulgence, where grown men talk cartoons. This episode we'll be talking about Gundam Wing.
Yeah, Mobile Suit Gundam Wing to be exact. This series debuted in Japan in 1995. We'll be talking about the English dub that aired in North America in 2000.
And
I'm
along
Dais.
Wonderful.
I'm
Well,
Ever.
This is the most beautiful intro ever. And I'm a jork. Let's just get into this. Just fuck it. We're going with it. I'll make it work. Roll the intro.
You are listening to Animated Indulgence, the explicit and opinionated podcast where grown men talk about cartoons. Each episode will pick apart, analyze, and dissect an animated series or movie.
Warning, there will be spoilers, even potentially for shows and movies that are not the topic at hand.
We may watch cartoons, but we don't watch our language. Discretion is advised.
Anyway, you were saying, Airhammer? Go on. Tell us about Gundam Wing.
Okay, so yeah, this is Gundam Wing. The overall Gundam series started in 1979. I believe this is the 6th series of the franchise, out of many.
Many. More
Many.
than I could list. More than I'd care to list.
For North American audiences, I believe this is the most common series to have aired over here. It was the first I ever saw, next to one of the Super Deformed series that came out a few years later. I'm not sure if any other Gundam programming has been dubbed for television.
A few, yeah. But this
few?
was, I believe, the first.
Yes, it was the first.
Yeah.
And I believe it aired completely uncensored as well. Like, nothing was cut, which is surprising considering how much violence there is in it.
Yeah.
And
I also
when
like to
it
point out while
aired-
we're here, really quick. You mentioned that it's the
Mhm.
6th Gundam series or whatever. Don't let that intimidate you. It's entirely standalone. The only thing Gundam about it is it has giant robots. Like, you do not have to watch anything else Gundam to enjoy it. I'm sure, I 100% anticipate that there's a whole bunch of references and stuff that we're missing because we're not involved in the franchise and stuff. But, like, I'm sure that you can enjoy it more if you're a fan of Gundam as a whole. But yeah, it's not needed.
Yeah, it's really important to know that whether you're a Gundam fan or not, this is not part of the Universal Century continuity. It's a standalone continuity, which makes it the perfect starting point for people who are trying to get into Gundam, because you don't have the baggage of needing to know all the backstory. They give you everything in one package.
I agree. I'm glad that after having done some research on the greater Gundam universe, and holy shit, I'm glad we started here, because it seems like it's a very big thing to get into, and this is a nice little starting point. So
This show is a near-future sci-fi military action drama. When I say near-future, I mean about 200 years in the future. There's some space colonies, but no interstellar travel, no alien species, no tricorders, no...
it's low sci-fi. It's low sci-fi. I don't know if that's an actual term or not, but that's what I've always called it. Everything
the science fiction is...
Yeah, go ahead.
It's very grounded, very realistic. There aren't any Jedi, there aren't any green people invading. There are, I think the most exaggerated thing are the giant military-grade robots flying around, and that's just too cool not to include. I'd also like to point out that it's a very dense, crunchy show. It's not for children. It's difficult to keep track of all the elements and events at times. It's a very difficult show to watch because of not only the themes, but also the characters involved, trying to keep track of their motivations.
Another aspect of that is, while totally not absent, there is a lack of humor in this show. It is very dry. It is very... At times it feels almost newscast-like, or maybe like it's a slice of a fictionalized documentary. Not to say it's a bad thing, it's just this is a show I could not, in any stretch of the imagining, see myself watching as a kid.
I don't think you could watch this casually and lightly. This is something you have to sit down and watch as if it were a novel you were reading.
Yeah. So you got any opening thoughts?
I would like to go over the basic plot without being very spoilery. The story follows a group of 5 young terrorists from space colonies sent with state-of-the-art military equipment to destabilize Earth's government, while they and the colonies they work for are all being manipulated by a warmonger hidden within the ranks of the Earth government.
Yeah, it's very convoluted at times, and there's lots of factions and groups to keep track of, but it's very much a larger scope. There's at times where, like, you'll see time skips, not giant ones, but time skips where big important events happen off screen. It's a larger scale show.
2 weeks time skips, I would say, most of the time. Maybe a month at most. Yeah, 2 weeks to a month at most, maybe a couple months. It's hard to keep track of time, but it never feels like it leaves you hanging for very long. It just glosses over anything that would be slow, that would be uninteresting to watch.
Yeah, like,
which I find is convenient.
If there's no reason for them to show it to us, it's not shown. That's one thing the show does very well, and that you can't miss anything. There's other shows that you watch and you can miss a full, like, 2 or 3 minutes and still get the gist of the episode and not feel like it's ruined or you totally lost track of what the hell's going on. You cannot do that with this show. You have to pay attention. Every little detail matters. If they're showing you something, it matters in some context.
Sort of.
That's the way I saw
recall. Like, I had moments where an episode might seem rather slow to the point where I would read the description afterward online, and comparing it to what I just saw visually, I could pretty much just read the description and I could visualize it in my head, and it would be the same as what I just watched.
I guess that's kind of the nature of, like, how things have changed, but, like, if you didn't have if you didn't have a resource to look up to recap, right? If you were just watching this on cable and you missed something, you'd be like, "Oh fuck, what the hell's going on?" You'll have to try to piece shit together. Mm-hmm. Like, why is this person fighting this person this episode? What you know?
Overall, story aside, I feel like the pacing was quite good as far as events go. I think they hit the beat fairly quickly and didn't dwell on any one moment too long. Whether or not that moment was intensely important to the overall narrative, not always, but they never kept you drug along on the same boring thing forever, which is part of, I guess, being full of important little moments. Also, it does open kind of cold with a bit of an info dump, but I feel like it expands the point of view as the narrative progresses. So while it starts out a little more broad than you might feel comfortable, it doesn't keep going out at a breakneck pace. Once you get comfortable with what you've seen, you sort of ease into the story, especially by the middle of the show, around episode 25 or so. Which I know sounds like a long time, but by 25 it's practically a tunnel of, okay, here's loose ends to tie up.
Yeah. So anything else we want to say, spoiler-free?
Actually, I could think of a couple things.
Okay.
The way it tells the story, it gives you multiple sides of the conflicts and lets you decide on your own. It doesn't tell you how to think. It has some issues of telling you how to feel at times. It has a few episodes where it just tells you things outright rather than show you, but it never makes the decisions for you, which I appreciate. Also, we mentioned that it's very dramatic and not very comedic. Sometimes that works to its detriment. This is the second most dramatic show we've seen on this podcast as of this date, behind Yu-Gi-Oh! Sometimes the drama gets a little too high on the scale and it makes it more dull than exciting.
Yeah, it's all very exaggerated. It's all super over-the-top dramatic. Did you say you had 2 points, or did you already mention them both?
Well, I had one more thing. If you are a listener who thinks, okay, I want to pause this now, I want to go watch the show and listen to the rest of this podcast episode after they're done with spoiler-free, I'm going to pause this and watch the show and come back to this podcast later. Good for you. That's why we have spoiler-free. But skip episodes 27 and 28 because for some reason they put 2 goddamn consecutive clip shows in this show. I don't care who did it, why they did it. I know they had issues of one of the major creative people leaving in the middle of the show. It is unforgivable to have 2 clip shows back to back regardless of the reason, and just skip those 2. There is no redeeming content in those 2 episodes.
Japan loves their clip shows.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. I understand the reasoning for clip shows. I just wish more shows did them better.
This is the worst instance of clip shows I've ever seen in any show. 2 back to back. I was dumbfounded.
Yeah.
Flabbergasted that they would do that. I understand they had some production issues in the middle of the season, and they took it with stride. This is not your solution. I would have much preferred them taking that time in the middle of this show, right there, smack in the middle, because it goes up to, 49? So those are right past the midpoint. I would love for them to have shown stills and have the narrator go over some of the world building. I would have loved for them to go into some of the details of things that they didn't have time for otherwise. Anything but a clip show recap of what we've already seen with no new content, no narrative benefit whatsoever. It was absolutely miserable, and I just don't understand how they got away with it.
Some shows have it worse.
Yeah, probably. 3 clip shows in a row.
Oh, well, I did mention to you that one of the Japanese Transformer series had 6 in a row, but they were all placed at the end, so really it was optional. You didn't have to watch them. You already saw everything.
That's a little bit better of an example of how to do a clip show, right?
I suppose.
It's not ideal, but it's a better way to do it at the end.
I was very disappointed in that. I was upset.
Yeah. Warning, the spoiler-free section is now over. Continue listening at your own risk. Anyway, moving on. Expectations? You want to move on?
Expectations.
This is expectations for Gundam Wing. Who wants to lead?
I guess I'll start. I watched this during its original run many years ago on YTV. Back then, I pretty much enjoyed it. It's really the only Gundam series that I've focused on. I think one of the Super Deformed series was on a few years after that, but it wasn't as good. I don't remember much about the characters. I might recall a few names here and there, and the battle scenes were pretty cool. So I'm wondering how my second viewing of the series is going to be like.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I can go next. I know next to nothing about this show. I know there's giant robots. I know they ride inside of them, and they fight them. That's all I know. And that's about all I can expect, too, really. I expect there be a continuity and an overarching plot, like a bad guy or a evil empire or a evil government or something. But yeah, I'm thinking it's probably going to be hard sci-fi. I'm not sure if there's going to be aliens or other races around or not, but it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, I guess that's about it. How about you, Dais?
I've seen some of the show, but I never got to sit down and watch it beginning to end. I've just seen a few scattered episodes. I couldn't pick up much of what I was watching, so I dropped the series when it was originally airing. And because of that, that was one of the big shows that I missed during that era of Toonami. That was one of the big mainstays of Toonami that I just outright missed out on. I have seen the spiritual successor show, and in that sense, I have some expectations based around that. I expect a very grounded science fiction. I expect a lot of political elements muddling what the heroes want to do. I expect a very dry, serious tone. I expect a very narrative-driven show, and hopefully a very good one.
So I guess that's it.
Yep.
So yeah, how do you think it lived up to your expectations?
Well, as I watched it, I can recall scenes from my original viewing from 17 years ago. The show seemed much slower than it did back then. I do recall watching the entire thing and Endless Waltz on TV, but yeah, it seemed slower paced and toward the end a little more boring. Like, I think a lot of the best parts of the series happened within the first half,
I agree.
up to, say, episode 25, 26. And then starting around the mid-30s, it really slows down.
I'm going to say it's remarkably consistent, but I much preferred episodes 30 through 45 to the early ones. I just felt like the quality jumped up to me. At least, I felt like those episodes had a better flow. They felt more natural to me. In fact, I think episode 32 might be my favorite of the entire series. All that said, though, not quite as good as I expected. I based my recommendation to watch the show around how much I enjoyed the spiritual successor, Gundam 00. I don't like this as much as 00. It was similar, and I could see some of the same ideas being used, but I don't think they were explored as well. I think they left a lot of loopholes in the story. The characters were not super endearing, though they were interesting and understandable. So I guess it had a lot of merits. It's a good show, but it wasn't up to the expectations I had held for it. I will say that Endless Waltz was a lot better than I expected, though. That was a wonderful end cap to the series.
As for my expectations, I didn't fall in love with it as much as I thought I might. When I went into this, I thought maybe its sci-fi nature was going to really hook me. And I do like a lot of stuff about it. I do like sci-fi ideas and concepts. But it ended up being way drier and more involved. It's not something I could get home from work and shut my brain off to enjoy. I didn't fall in love with it like I expected, I guess. There was a lot of robot fights, and I love that. So yeah, I guess that's what I'll say about my expectations. We'll move on to characters?
Okay, so characters. There are a lot of characters in this show.
So let's start off here for a moment. Like, I don't know how we've really decided the order to do characters in before, but this time this show is thankfully easily lined it up for us. We could go with characters in numerical order because the character names in this show are all, not all, but for the most part, some kind of reference to a number and some kind of language. So that's kind of a neat thing right off the bat about the characters and their names. Hiro, for example, arguably the main character of the show, the main protagonist. I would say he is, right, guys?
Yeah.
I'd say so, yeah.
The titular Gundam Wing is a reference to his Gundam in particular, so yeah, definitely. But Hiro, the main character, is a reference to the way the number 1 is said in Japanese. We can start there. What do you guys want to say about Hiro?
He's introduced as kind of a dick.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know much about him at first. He's on a mission. He's not going to take any crap from anybody. And the first person that he's really encountering is Relina, who's basically this oblivious little rich girl at first, who's handing out birthday invitations. And when she eventually gets to Hiro, he tears it up. Like,
I loved that scene.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just
arguably
pass it.
one of the most iconic scenes in the entire series is in the first episode.
Yep, just passes right by her and whispers in her ear, "I'm gonna kill you."
That sets off their relationship so well, though. Their relationship is ice cold and very intriguing. I think the relationships between the characters are kind of a cornerstone of this show. So when characters start off that strong with that much interest, it really shows the strength of the show. Hiro is a disciplined soldier He has been physically conditioned to be practically a machine. He breaks his leg at one point and ends up setting the bone and then walking on it the next episode.
Yeah. He's kind of a badass in that regard.
He is capable of amazing physical punishment. He is extremely durable. He starts off kind of boring like that, almost like the Terminator in some ways, until his human side is slowly revealed throughout the course of the first story arc. And I would say after the first major turning point of the story, he has sort of come to terms with the fact that his mission is far from over, and he begins communicating more, acting with a bit more empathy for his comrades.
Yeah, he definitely grows as a character as the show goes on. Something else I'd like to point out before we go too deep into characters, just because it is relevant. Unless otherwise noted, the majority of characters that we'll be talking about are teenagers or young adults, which is kind of interesting considering the heavy emphasis on war and stuff in this show. But I just thought that was worth pointing out.
It is.
Yep.
Very, very late in the series. In fact, in Endless Waltz, that finally comes up as a plot point in one of the greatest character redemptions I can think of from any series.
You want to jump right into him or save him?
Well, we're going by number, so
Okay.
pending by number, Duo is next up.
Duo would be next, but there's also Lady Un, who's number 1 as well.
No, she would refuse to be anything other than directly before or after Trace. You know this.
Fair enough.
She will come and kill us if we make her anything other than next to Trace.
It depends on what mode she's in. But
We're talking about Trace, though.
Okay, I stand corrected. I stand corrected. Let's move on to Duo. Remember earlier when I mentioned that there is one character that actually jokes in this show? Duo's that guy.
Yeah, he's just this young go-getter that loves to fight.
He's fiery, he's energetic, he acts like a human being. He's portrayed by the living legend Scott McNeil.
Oh, yeah.
Thank God for Scott McNeil for making some of the most natural-sounding dialogue also feel natural in this show, because we have some issues with the dialogue and such later. Localization is going to be kind of a burden for us. But yeah, he makes the cast sort of understandable. He makes you sympathize with the Gundam pilots more than anyone else, I think.
Yeah,
he makes it feel like people are there.
More than any of the other pilots, he's the most relatable person of the 5 pilots. He's the most human-like, the least affected in his social skills by the brainwashing or training, if you will, that he went through as a kid to become a Gundam pilot. I say brainwashing, it depends on which pilot you're talking about. Heroes is like, I have to fucking self-destruct, the mission's going wrong. That's kind of brainwashing to me. That's kind of
it's like I said before, he's extremely disciplined to a fault.
Yeah.
He's uncompromising to the point where it hurts him many times.
But yeah, Duo's like the opposite.
Yeah.
He's super laid back. He's the most human of the pilots.
Yeah, that's another little thing that we could probably say in that...
also, his numbers too, obviously, in Italian, before I forget.
Each of the Gundam pilots at some point in the series feels the need to put their Gundam on self-destruct for some reason or another. The other 4, at least, have the brain to get away from the Gundam, whereas Hiro did it while standing right on its entrance hatch.
Yeah.
The guy's nuts.
Also, when Duo... I forgot. Hiro, just as important with Hiro, we'll talk about him more in detail, but Hiro's Gundam is Gundam 01, the Wing Gundam, and then later on, Wing 0. I just thought that's an important thing we should point out. Each of these characters match up with a Gundam that they ride around in. Duo...
Yeah, Duo. He has the Death Scythe.
Death Scythe, and
yeah.
You praise this guy's voice acting so much, and I have to agree with you, it's so good. His... Duo's cry when Death Scythe is blown up and he sees the footage of it is just like fucking... You can almost feel his pain. He's like, oh my fucking god.
Okay. I actually have a fun anecdote about that. I was researching this episode a bit, and according to some interview he did at some point, he dug deep and actually took real-life inspiration for that moment. He thought back to when his wife backed over his Harley Davidson. And that was his inspiration for his pained cry when Death Scythe exploded before him.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Scott fucking McNeil.
Yeah, Duo has Death Scythe. Not my favorite mech, but it's pretty cool. Anything else to say about Duo?
Duo's relationship with the other pilots is very interesting because you would think he'd be the easiest to get along with, but I don't think any of them get along with him super well.
Yeah.
He spends the most time with Hiro, but they are like the odd couple.
Yeah.
So
they're opposites.
Yeah. And you would think he would get along well with someone like Troa or Katra, but they don't really spend a whole lot of time communicating or interacting whatsoever. So I found it very unusual that someone who seems very easy to get along with isn't really best friends with any of the other pilots.
It highlights an interesting point, and that there's so many main important characters in this show, and a lot of times, like, there's big, gigantic swaths of the show where A, some of the characters are just not around, or B, like, a lot of characters just never interact in any meaningful ways, you know?
Yep.
Which makes sense. The world's a big place, right?
Is it time to move on to Troa?
Yep.
Yes.
3 in French.
He's a circus performer. He doesn't like to fight. I actually like to compare him like he's a combination of Mega Man X and Zero.
Okay.
In that he doesn't like to fight, but he also doesn't know much about his past.
Yeah. Amnesia, stole other people's identity. He lives with his sister? Is it actually his sister? Like,
no.
Actually, like,
No.
She claims he's his sister when he has amnesia, is what it is. That's what it is, yeah.
Yeah, when he's
adopted family, I would assume.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The circus is his family.
Fair enough. Carnies stick together.
So I like to consider him the perpetual cool guy. He is always calm, except in a very few situations. He's very dedicated to his task and to his friends and family. He ends up shifting his view more from his task to his friends and family as the show progresses, which I think is a wonderful character progression for him. He seems to bring out the best in people around him, too. Anytime he's around, his colleagues, allies, anyone nearby seems to be braver, more clear in thought. He's a wonderful character, one of my favorites of the Gundam pilots.
Yeah, and he has that gravity-defying hair, you know, like Joey from Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yep.
Next, you want to go...
Well, no, I guess we could mention his Gundam, which is heavy arms.
Yeah, heavy arms.
On top of guns, within guns, with more guns.
Yeah, heavy arms is pretty cool.
Two massive Gatling cannons on each arm. It's
Well, it starts with one, then it gets upgraded.
And he has fucking rockets on his shoulders, machine guns on his nipples. Just fucking guns everywhere.
Yeah, his greatest worry in battle is running out of ammo. Honestly, his Gundam is so opposed to his personality as well. You would think that being this heavy metal machine gun...
Well, he wasn't made for it.
Guy.
Like, someone else was supposed to have that Gundam, right?
Exactly. We don't find that out until the very end of the series, and it's wonderful because there is this opposition between his personality and the machine he pilots, and it never feels quite right. It doesn't feel on point the way the others do, and then you find out why, and it's wonderfully told.
Yeah.
It's a great twist.
Since we're out of spoiler free, we can talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he killed a guy and took his identity. We actually already said it.
Yeah, he stole someone's identity. The pilot was meant to be a rich kid, and honestly, that kid was just too much of a liability to the program.
Yeah, we didn't get to see that much
too much of a liability to Earth. So he was shot in the back, and this mechanic took the pilot's identity.
Rip Troa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now we move on. You pronounce his name right. You go do this one.
Katra Rababa.
Katra. French for 4.
I remembered all his names.
You did.
So Katra is a gentle soul, and he
everything
pilots the Sandrock Gundam.
And everything is his own fault, according to him. Like everything.
Yeah, he's a young man with a lot of responsibility, and he's used to taking responsibility. So when something goes wrong, he just instinctively, like, oh, this is my fault, I could have stopped that. Which is endearing in a way, but obviously somewhat annoying for the people around him. He is probably the one that has the best grasp of what's actually happening in the big picture of all the pilots. The others are very focused on their goals. He's focused more on the end result.
Yeah. And he's the whitest Arab boy you'll ever see.
Oh my gosh, he is this blonde-haired, green-eyed Aryan ideal who just happens to be Arabic for whatever reason. And they have other Arabic people on the show.
Who are actually dark
skin with dark brown hair.
It's absurd.
Yeah, they have for some reason they just decided, okay, no, this one's, I don't know, is he albino? I don't know.
This guy's the leader.
Albino?
No, they went down the list. They're like, okay, this guy, okay, Hiro, he's the main guy, leader dude, duo, comedy relief, sidekick dude, Troa, circus performer, mistress pass, Wu Fei is a fucking dickhole and barely ever around. Quattro, what the hell's his thing? An Arab prince? Sure.
Yeah. Nice guy, Arab prince.
Yeah, nice to a point. In episode 21, he becomes a Batman villain. I forget exactly what happened, but it made him go nuts.
I'd like to point out I'd like to point out he may be a white Arab, but it's not as offensive as Carbarmia.
It's not. It's not. But no, I think in episode 21, was that when he piloted the Zero and the Zero system drove him crazy?
That might have been.
Oh, yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, it's just the dialogue that was going on after that and his attitude. It made it seem like he was a Batman villain.
Yeah. Quattro did not agree with the Zero system. Where Hiro took to it, and like we haven't really talked about it yet, but later in the series, there's the so-called Zero system, which is an advanced Gundam, like, OS, I guess?
It helps you predict the future.
It's supposed to, like, connect you with the mech. The mech talks to you. It's weird.
From what I understand, it is meant to feed you all of the possibilities from the combat you're in and help you predict the enemy's movement.
Yeah.
But it goes too far and gives you visions of the future that don't actually happen and ends up warping your mind to the point where even possible enemies are seen as true foes because of probabilities and such, and really clouds your judgment.
The idea is, like, it's supposed to be like a neural interface from the mech itself into your brain, giving you all the data from the mech that it's collecting and processing it to tell the outcomes, and then fries your brain.
Yeah, it would have been nice if they explained this better in the show.
Yeah.
You're shown, which is great, but I would have liked a little bit more information because it's not something that you can experience as a viewer. It's one
of the very few things they didn't tell exactly how it works with exposition.
True. But as far as Quattro goes, he's kind of a likable little wimp. He's very devoted to the cause. He unfortunately is afflicted with some of the worst lines in the entire script.
Yeah.
Also, one interesting fact about Quattro, especially in relation to Troa, I mentioned earlier how the relationships are really an important part of it. It is heavily implied that at one point at least, Troa and Quattro have a romantic relationship. I don't know if it ever gets physical or anything, but I think the imagery of them playing music together speaks for itself. They are very, very close to each other, at least very close friends, to the point where Quattro, after Troa disappears, is pretty much constantly on the look for him. He's not willing to rest until he finds Troa. Every time he gets the chance to look for him, he brings it up. Let's look for Troa. We can't do this until we find Troa.
Man, you just made me realize.
Very close.
The fan fiction for this show is probably a dumpster fire.
The fan fiction is notorious. Yes. Yeah. The fan fiction for Gundam Wing is notorious.
Yeah.
I was going to bring that up in supplemental, but yeah. The fan fiction community around this show is, let's say, active. Let's go with that.
Anyway, his Gundam is...
Sandrock.
He's one of the least memorable in my book.
Yeah, you kind of get through Hiro and Duo and Troa, and then here's Sandrock. What does Sandrock do? I forget.
Got two big swords.
Yep. 2 big swords. Okay.
He gets so little.
Very good ground mobility, much like Heavy Arms.
Like, they're all unique, but I guess that's the one that kind of slips your mind as you watch. You remember the others, but yeah,
definitely for me, he's the least memorable and the least exciting of the mechs.
Yeah. We mentioned earlier that all the Gundams at some point explode. A lot of them self-detonate. I will bring up the point that for whatever reason, Heavy Arms doesn't explode in any way. It just sucks in space and gets retrofitted.
So Heavy Arms is the only one of the original 5 that survives in some form?
Yeah. In fact, not even Talkies survives. It also gets blown up.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Heavy Arms is the only one. I guess the main 6.
It gets sunk in the ocean for a while, but it doesn't blow up.
Neat. I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that when we were speaking about Troa, but talking about the Gundams themselves reminded me.
We'll move on to Chang Wu-Fei.
Oh boy, yeah.
This guy is loaded. We're gonna have to speak a bit on him.
Okay. Before we start, The Wu and Wu Fei is Chinese for 5, so he's
Okay.
5. That one eluded me for a long time because originally when I wrote up my list, I didn't look them up. I mean, it occurred to me that someone else probably knew, but I was having fun writing them out as I found them myself. But anyway, I knew he had to be 5. It was just too convenient that the other ones lined up, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, Chang Wu Fi, whatever.
Woofy, yeah.
He's the 5th Gundam pilot of Operation Meteor or whatever, and he's kind of an ass. He's kind of angsty. He is misogynistic, kind of degrading to women in a lot of scenes. He's just an asshole. A good chunk of the time, he's just gone. Irrelevant to the show because he's just gone. I'm doing my own thing, guys. Bye!
Yeah, I referred to him as the most useless character, and that he was literally the Yamcha of the show because he shares the same voice actor as Yamcha from Dragon Ball. So, yeah, just weird coincidence there.
Funny you mentioned the Dragon Ball character, because to me, I feel like he has less motive than the other pilots, and he sort of suffers from that Vegeta pride. His pride gets him in a lot of trouble at times, and honestly, he's manipulated at one point by it. He has a chance to just kill Treize outright, but he gets out of his Gundam and sword fights him, loses, and retreats. I'm not kidding. That literally happens. He's kind of a piece of shit misogynistic bully. He has this belief in might makes right to the point where he says multiple times, if you think what you're doing is right, come and stop me. If you think your beliefs are stronger than mine, then come defeat me. Which is obviously not at all how real arguments work. He wants to solve everything with a fight. He only really serves the story twice, and honestly, I feel like one of those times could have been someone else. For most of the show, he would have been better off not there, and he works better as a villain than as a protagonist. Much better, in fact.
And his mech is lame, too.
His real redeeming shining moment is in Endless Waltz. Now, I wanted to mention I hated this character. Wu Fei was my least favorite character until Endless Waltz. And then he joined the bad guys. Not as a ruse, he legitimately joined them. He joined the new bad guys for Endless Waltz. Earth was at peace, and he joined the new warmongers that were trying to conquer Earth. For real. Not as a ruse, not as I'm trying to infiltrate them. Just he legitimately wanted to be a part of them, and he worked so much better as a villain. And in the end, his motives for joining them were revealed to be the fact that he was very bitter about how he had been treated. Earth had been set to peace, but no one had changed. No one acted differently. No one was holding hands. All the soldiers that fought, the ones that had lived their entire lives for combat like he had, the ones that didn't know another path in life, they were shoved aside and forgotten. He was so upset about that he joined these people starting a new war. So he had a huge commentary on veterans' rights at the last moment. This would have been, if this show was 50 episodes long, this would have been in the 50th episode that he finally redeemed himself.
Yeah.
So it's really important to note that for the majority of the show, he is absolutely worthless, and the show would have been better off without him. But that one shining moment was so good to see this worthless, terrible, hateable character have something to say. There was a point to him at the end.
He's just a really boring, bland, repetitive character until the movie.
Yeah.
He has a couple of Gundams, doesn't he?
Yes. He starts off piloting Notaku and ends up in Endless Waltz piloting Shenlong.
Yes.
His mechs are known. They have like this weird stretchy arm.
Yes,
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
With a dragon hand.
Dragon hand, yeah. Hence
like
Shenlong, which, yeah.
Extendo arm. So like I said, for the longest time, he was my least favorite. I'm like, what the fuck? You get a giant mech and you get the weird arm? You don't get guns? What?
I'm pretty sure he has guns, he just doesn't use them because of his stupid Warrior's Pride thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did take off for a while. We don't see Wu Fei again till like episode 35, and he's hanging out at some
Colony.
temple on a colony. And upon leaving to join the battle, his master just, I don't know what the hell's going on. It's like the whole thing was just some little cult that Wu Fei wasn't even aware of. His master blows the colony up with all of the followers in it. And this is right after Wu Fei got off the colony. What the hell is going on with this sensei? The guy was fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Like, we're gonna motivate Wu Fei. Let's kill each other.
I just think everyone wants everything to blow up in the Gundam Wing universe. Like, there's very few people who are anti-explosion. Relena and That's about it.
Yeah. This show has a very large death count.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ooh, it probably competes with the death count and Attack on Titan.
Yeah.
I'm actually curious to go back and maybe rank the shows we've watched by death count. That'd be kind of a funny thing to do at some point. But this is definitely up there.
Just you wait till Steven Universe Season 10, man.
The cluster finally emerges. All of Earth is extinct. But yeah, lots of people die in the show. Entirely colonies of people. But yeah, but basically...
Do we want to talk about ZX Marquis, the lightning count now?
6 and German. Yeah. Move on to ZX.
I referred to him at first as Tuxedo Mask due to the fact that he's got that helmet on for about, I don't know, a good 3/4 of the series. He loves his helmet. He really must.
The helmet is a reference to the original Mobile Suit Gundam. The main villain there, Char, wears a mask very similar.
In episode 34, there is a scene where Zex is in a completely different suit with another helmet on, but he still has the helmet on under the helmet. He loves his helmet.
He is very much a villain at the beginning of the show, but becomes more ambiguous and kind of more on the main character sides near the end, when it's revealed that other characters are the bigger bads. What else to say about him?
I think Zex has issues with midterm goals and loses sight of both the immediate and long-term consequences of what he does at every point in the story, and that causes him to have one of the most interesting character arcs in the entire series. Also, his voice, Brian Drummond's voice, makes sweet, sweet love to your ears the entire time he's on screen.
And he pilots first he starts off piloting nothing, or just generic suits.
A Taurus.
Yeah,
just a
generic
Taurus.
suits.
He acquires the Tallgeese, which is the prototype from which the Gundams were built, and eventually masters its use.
Until it blows up and he gets the Epion, which is basically one of the big...
Actually, he gets the Wing Zero, and then trades it for the Epion.
Oh yeah, that's right. Characters swap mechs, I like that. They're interchangeable, they're just... As much as the mechs themselves, they do have character, in more ways than one. The Wing Zero almost literally talks to Hiro through the Zero system or whatever. So they do have kind of character and personality, each of the mechs. They're all, the main ones are distinct, but they are still interchangeable equipment. The pilots swap between them, and they're not afraid to blow them up, which is another aspect of that. They're still just things.
These are military hardware, first and foremost. While the pilots might have an emotional attachment to them, not like they're individuals. No.
Yeah, my favorite episode, as a matter of fact, features a fight between Zex and the Tallgeese and Hiro piloting Troa's mech, the Heavy Arms. That's one of my favorite fights in the entire series, and it's one where Hiro's not even in his own mech. So yeah, it's kind of a neat thing to do. Kind of got in a tangent there. Relena?
Sure. As I already described her, when you first see her, she's kind of like this oblivious little rich girl. She doesn't know much about the world or her life. She's just, privileged. It isn't until her supposed father is killed in an Oz attack that she learns about her life, and everything just changes from there.
She's the princess of a country that is known for its entire devotion to pacifism. She takes it to extremes in a lot of ways. Kind of like extreme pacifism. People around me are dying. Along those lines.
Yeah, she has that little bit of an awkward relationship with Hiro throughout the series. It's like the moment that he threatens to kill her, she's in love with him in some way.
She has some kind of issues.
She flat out just screams right at him, "I'm right over here, so come and kill me." She wants it bad.
I like her though. Because of some of the gutsy moves she makes, I actually rather like Relena. She was one of my favorite characters. She starts off unmotivated, but she's willful throughout the entire series. She has probably the single most character progression. I don't particularly like the long period of time where she was Princess Relena Peacecraft, and much prefer when she was Relena Dorland, because she felt more natural at that point. She felt more comfortable with her own ideas. It felt more like she had inherited someone else's ideas and goals when she was acting as Relena Peacecraft.
Yeah, when she came out as Relena Peacecraft, every time she was featured, pretty much all her screen time was just her debating with fucking Miss What's Her Eyebrows.
she's such a central character. I mean, she's given the entire ending credit sequence. Her goal is the goal of the entire show. Total pacifism, no need for war, no need to fight back. That is the utopian idea that they set forth, and everyone knows it's unattainable. I think even she knows.
Yeah.
But she refuses to let go, and she refuses to relent on this unrealistic idea because it's something that she feels is worth giving up her life for, worth fighting for, worth making a stand for. It's really the point of the show. So I think we really can't understate that. As ridiculous as it may come off, every time she does something knowingly stupid, she does it to make a point. Also, this girl's got ovaries because before she decided to be total pacifist, she straight up pulled a gun and tried to shoot the woman who murdered her father.
Yeah, you just kind of mentioned it there. You have the intro that focuses on all the core characters. You have the main show that is about war, and then you have the end credits, which is just Relina on an African safari, which was rather interesting.
I always considered that to be a vision of her utopia, where not even the lions and rhinos hurt her.
I see.
Yeah, like she's having some kind of dream or something.
Yeah. That's an idealized version of her peaceful dream where not even a lion will attack her and she could cuddle it like a teddy bear or a puppy.
Since she is a pacifist, she doesn't have a mech, obviously. She's like the only main character that's never driven a mech, right? At all? Or a Gundam at all? Of any sort?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very few characters are pure civilians in this. It covers a lot of military characters, and Relina is a politician and purely civilian at that.
Okay, do you want to move on? What's some other ones to touch on? Other characters?
Well, we mentioned Dorothy. She has long blonde hair and 4 eyebrows, which are gray.
That can merge into one eyebrow. They do like this weird... It's like you had Leonard Nimoy with the Spock eyebrows, right? But stacked on top of normal people eyebrows as well, and they kind of connect.
You know, Dorothy Catalonia has like greater than less than eyebrows. That's what they are.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
She's the only major character to be introduced after the midpoint of the show. All the other characters are either minor or not introduced that far in. And she is a civilian related to someone with great political power, and she's basically an amplified version of Relina who's bent more for war than peace.
Yeah, she's anti-Relina.
Yeah. She does get along with Relina well. She's like a fangirl of Relina.
Oh, yeah. But she's like stands for the opposite of everything Relina does. Relina's like, peace, peace, peace at all costs. And she's like, if I had a cock, I'd be on a fucking hard-on for fucking war right now. Like, she is like super into it. She's like...
Oh, no. When a fight starts out, she gets her golden car, her solid gold car, tells Relina to get in so that they can go spectate the war. Yeah. She will see a mobile suit and just sploosh right there.
Yes. She is really, really, really into war. It's like she has a fetish for it.
She is eventually broken down and built back up. Her weakness is revealed. Her reasoning for her obsession with war is revealed very late in the series by Catra, who, despite not being a pacifist, does refuse to fight her at that point. I suppose just because he can't understand her and refuses to kill someone he doesn't believe is wrong. Again, Catra's a very gentle soul, but it ends up, despite their setup with Relina, Catra is her foil more than Relina.
Oh yeah, move on.
Let's see. Catherine.
Oh yeah, Catherine.
Catherine.
Yeah, another non-numbered character. I just realized something.
Yes?
Is it just the non-military characters that aren't numbers?
Possibly. I haven't checked into the numbering system of the characters personally, but it may very well be.
Because we just talked about... Catherine is the third character in a row that's not associated with a number, but she's also a third character in a row that's a civilian. Coincidence?
Maybe. They don't have a lot of civilian characters, so it may be the case.
Yeah.
Catherine is my favorite character in the show. She is the circus performer who works with Troa and is very close to him. She obviously has a crush on him and would like to pursue a relationship until he gets amnesia, in which case she becomes more protective and acts more as a sibling. every scene she's in, she makes better for her presence. Her dialogue is natural. Her performance from the voice actress is wonderful. Everything she does makes the show more relatable, more human, and genuinely better. She is a wonderful character. It's unfortunate that she's such a marginalized side character because everything she does is good and interesting.
Yeah, and she is one of the most sensical characters. And, like, everyone else, like, every other fucking line coming out of their mouth is like, gotta kill myself, gotta blow myself up for honor, gotta die, you know. And she's like, she's the one of the few people that's like, you know, maybe not die. If you want to blow up your mech, maybe just not be in it. You know, like,
she slapped the shit out of Troa for even thinking of it.
Yeah.
She was very upset.
Yep.
So
And honestly, that moment also gave Troa not only the clarity to not blow himself up, but to give himself reason not to try it again, because he realized he had a family in the circus. Whether it was cover originally or not, it had become his family.
Yeah. But yeah, she's like kind of a side character. There's Noin. She's
Yes.
Yeah. Knowing
Lucretia Noin.
She is 9 in German.
9. Yeah.
Her first impression is very mixed because she starts off obsessing over Zex to an alarming degree. She tells him how many hours it's been since the last time they met. Creepy stalker lady. But everything else she does is super likable, and she's one of the most sensible and likable characters in the show. She never pilots a Gundam, but she has this custom mobile suit. I think it's a Taurus? No, I can't remember the model. The ugly space thing with the pointy hat.
Oh, I pointed out at one point too that Relena owes so much to Noin.
Yes. I think a lot of the characters owe a lot to Noin. Noin is an amazing supporting role in the show, and
yeah, she's always showing up to save people's asses. And when Relena got it in her mind, like she's like, okay, pure pacifism. We have this other raging country that isn't interested in having peace at all, and has already said multiple times they're gonna destroy our country. I think I'm gonna destroy all our mechs. And Noin's is like, let's not.
You had to start me on this tangent, didn't you? Okay, so Relena is typically shown as a very smart person, very wise individual. That was just dumb, and I really resent the fact that they did that. Naive. Because why did she not instead have all the suits that the Sanka Kingdom had in storage retrofitted with non-lethal weaponry, you idiot? Instead of having half dozen remain with lethal weaponry that goes against what you believe in, have them all loaded up with EMPs.
Fucking just don't even, instead of using the proper Gundams themselves, people have already started using the mobile dolls at that point. Now you could use mobile dolls with non-lethal weaponry. You don't have to risk your own people, and you can go take out the people that insist on attacking you.
I think her idea is not to kill. So I think the idea of using non-lethal weaponry does align better with the Sanka Kingdom. But seriously, stun grenades, EMPs,
non-lethal,
even better.
Dolls.
Yeah,
that's what I was saying.
Okay, that works too.
Yeah,
might have been expensive, but still, self-defense force is something that even Japan has. The Swiss Army drafts people, even though they remain neutral.
Yeah.
Seriously, Relena, forward move.
Thank God.
Okay, sorry for that tangent. Yeah, thank goodness Noin was around to save a half dozen suits.
Or the whole world would have been fucked. Because
Noin is also a character that changes allegiance quite a lot. At first, she is on Oz's side. She is with the Oz Foundation because Zex is. Then as Oz starts to fall apart and gets controlled more by the Rockefeller Foundation, she ends up ditching them when Zex leaves and joins his sister Relena in the opposing faction. And for the rest of the series, she stays there, except you would expect when Zex goes against her for her to swap back to his side, but she shows us some backbone and stays with Relena to oppose Zex. In fact, I think one of the most touching moments is when Zex and Noin show down in space, and then they can't bring themselves to attack each other.
Yeah, it's really good. really.
That's probably my favorite scene in the entire series, is when those two are face to face, able to fire upon each other. Epion could easily just cut Nguyen's suit in half. She could have fired some shots at him as he approached. They couldn't bring themselves to attack.
Yeah, let's face it though, she would have been fucked if they could.
She was severely outgunned by the Epion. Yeah.
Yeah, Epion versus random. I mean, it's her own personal fine-tuned generic Gundam, but it's still a generic Gundam.
Mm.
But yeah, Nguyen's a badass. Always saving the day, being useful. What do you want to say about her, Airhammer?
She was just a kind soul. Like, she was one of my favorite female characters of the show. Yeah, always there to save people, and she just had that unique relationship with Zex. Like, at one point, I like to call it, she wanted to have Zex with Zex. She would follow him to the ends of the earth. Like, I don't know what it is, but she just always wanted him to see the light and be
Obsession.
by her side.
That's what it is.
Yeah, obsession. Mm-hmm.
Relay's obsessed with, pacifism. She's obsessed with, Zex. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lady Un's obsessed with Treyas. Speaking of.
Yeah. In fact, that's one of the weird things. There's a lot of obsessive women, and I like a woman that knows what she wants, but seriously,
Yeah.
writers, you're gonna pull the same card 3 times? At least they're strong characters.
Yeah.
There are a number of other side characters that we would love to discuss if we had all the time in the world. Sally Poe, Howard, the 5 scientists, Tublarov, Cans. They're all
Duo's
great
girlfriend.
characters. Hildy, yes.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of other characters. But the only other main one we haven't touched on yet is the big bad himself.
Mm-hmm.
Reyes Kushranada, who doesn't really pilot any suit other than a rebuilt Tallgeese, but he does build the Epion and gift it to Hiro, who trades it with Zex for the Wing Zero. So eventually the Epion ends up in possession of Zex by the end of the
I
show.
didn't really think about it before, but man, fucking Hiro straight up traded that mech, straight up like a Pokemon. Just like, yeah, this was
no, it was like a car line or something. It's like, you got to... Yeah, no. They just traded. So, Trey's
13,
has...
by the way, French.
He has the motivation of the madness within a Cthulhu story. He is an incomprehensible thing. He has actions and words that don't match up. He is the weakest character in the entire series.
Yeah.
I'm sure they were trying to get something across, but the entire thing really didn't work for me. He ended up trying to play both sides, and I suppose to a degree doing it, but he did it in a way where none of his singular actions made a whole lot of sense, and his end goal was obscured for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah. So, from what I gather, you guys can tell me how close I am. Trey's plan for the very beginning was to play both sides and basically get the results that we see. It's implied that he was trying to achieve the results that we see at the end of the 49 episodes, not counting Endless Waltz.
Yes.
That
seems to be the case, but at the same time, it's done in such
so
a
patchy and convoluted,
way.
just
The
badly.
goal itself is very flimsy.
Yeah.
You would think that someone as brilliant as him would come up with a better plan.
It'd be like if I became a politician with the sole goal of egging America and China to the edge of nuclear war, just in the hope that they would cancel it out at the end and realize it is not a good idea.
Yeah,
It's a very bad
to,
fucking bluff. It's a very risky
if you
bluff.
wanted to promote, say, solar energy, so as a politician, you heavily taxed gasoline to the point where no business could be run. That's essentially what he was trying to do. It's definitely the weak point, and the way he goes about it is absolutely unfathomable. None of his particular moves, even when you're clued in, really make a lot of sense.
Yeah, he's supposed
The
to be
only
like
thing
this.
that comes off about him, to me, is that he's a master manipulator because he plays every side at all times, to the point where he's kicked out of Oz, only to be brought back into Oz, seen as a peacemaker instead of a warmonger, because he's trying to defend the peaceful Earth through his battle. That's the only time he really comes off as a real mastermind, and the character does not work for me. I can imagine possibly his goal was expedited by knowing that if he didn't do it quickly enough, his illegitimate daughter would be manipulated by her maternal grandfather into starting what happened in Endless Waltz. So maybe he felt like he was on a rushed timetable and had to do things stupid, but it didn't really work for me.
To be honest, I enjoyed Endless Waltz, but a lot of the stuff felt like it was kind of tacked on after the fact. That it was written after the fact. So I'm not.
See,
sure
the funny thing is, it felt more sensible than anything Trey's did, though.
Oh yeah, I enjoy it. I'm not saying it against it. I enjoyed it. I thoroughly liked the movie. I enjoyed the movie in and of itself, but it did feel kind of tacked on, and the whole Trey as his daughter as the bad guy. But I guess they really didn't have any other choice with Trey's having blown up. Yeah, so they kind of had to do something along those lines, but it does make it feel kind of tacked on.
It was tacked on, but it was still better
that is,
narrative.
I'd like to point out that it may sound like a negative thing, but I'm not trying to imply it that way. It's just something of note.
Yeah, I found Trey's very confusing, and I lost track of what he was actually trying to do in the show over time.
Exactly,
it's
that's the problem.
It's like, oh, all these people are at peace. No, we have to go to war. At least that's how I got it at first. And then he's ultimately killed off, and we're introduced to his daughter Marimea in the movie, and she's just like this tiny little general. She's 8-10 years old, and
she's like 8-year-old girl Hitler.
Yeah, she basically has his ideals and no direction, and then she gets bitch slapped.
She's manipulated.
It was so good, man. When she finally gets slapped, it's like one of the most satisfying moments of the entirety of the run of the show to me. It's just like,
oh yeah,
man, you introduced this character within the last hour and a half, and you made her so aggravating that her being bitch slapped was better than almost anything that's happened to Wu Fei through the entire show.
And what I love is that the best part of it was she's about to be slapped, and Relina gets in the way of the slap so the pacifist girl can do it herself.
It's
just
so
the
good.
pacifist can slap the shit out of a child.
Yeah, the fact that the slap comes from Relena just makes it so much better. Oh, I love that part.
And it's not like Relina slaps. No, Relina gets in the way so she can be the one to slap her.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, and then in the end, Marimea finally realizes that she's just a name, and she's being manipulated the whole time, and winds up paralyzed by the end of the movie.
Karma's a bitch.
Shot in the back by her own commander.
Yeah, I can't feel bad for her. I mean, okay, maybe she's a kid, brainwashed. Okay, I can't talk myself into feeling bad for her, but still, she's a bitch.
Yep.
An 8-year-old. It's hard to. Okay, I feel like an ass when I look at it in that context, but at the same time, the last character we had to talk about, we saved, I guess.
Oh yeah, the best for last.
Lady Un, which is French for one.
Yeah, so first thing I have to ask is the name. Now, I actually have to go back to maybe the early episodes, but later on she goes by Un. Was she referred to as Un earlier on? Because I could have sworn I heard both.
I think it's just...
No,
yeah.
I think it's just Un.
Yeah, I think it's Un.
Okay.
Pronounced Un.
Lady Un is schizophrenic.
No, she has... well, it's not schizophrenia. It's,
Well, sort of. I mean, it's like she is this kind...
She has multiple personalities, kind of.
Sort of, yeah.
Schizophrenic is something different. Schizophrenic is like hearing voices and, things that aren't there separately outside of your consciousness. She switches to a different personality.
Yeah, she'd be kind of lighthearted one moment with her hair down, and then the moment that she puts on her glasses, she just becomes this psychotic war general. And
victory at any cost. In a way, she's a less honorable hero, if you will. Like, she's the evil hero. Like, where Hero's like, I'm being tormented because I blew up this little girl once. She's like, let's blow up the little girl. When her glasses are on, she's like, war criminal.
She's very complex, very deadly. There's one episode where she opens up this hatch on whatever plane they're on, kicks the guy right out of the plane, And then as he's falling, at least another 30, 40 feet after the fall, with precise accuracy, shoots him right in the head.
Which is annoying, as that character's voice was very, very satisfying.
Oh, yes. General Nappa, as I like to call him, because it was Nappa's voice actor.
And Nappa's voice.
Yes.
He didn't even try.
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of characters in this show that have kind of a disconnect in that their voice will not match their figure or their personality. And we went on about the bad lines.
We'll go in that in localization. We'll save that for localization.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
Lady Un.
She
is a
go ahead.
despicable villain. She is absolutely ruthless in her pursuit of Treize's goals. As obsessed with Treize as Nguyen is with Zex, she undergoes a drastic change as Treize stations her in outer space and has her pose in what I presume to be originally a fake goal of being a peace ambassador, but she takes it to heart and ends up... I think one of the best depictions of dissociative disorder I've ever seen in fiction, where she knows she's her, but she acts so differently she doesn't even comprehend her other personality.
Yeah,
it's really remarkable. I don't think she's the best character, but man, she is the most entertaining to watch.
She's definitely interesting. Every time she's on the screen, something interesting is going on.
I really loved the symbolism in her personalities, because her personalities really show the duality of being a peace-seeking group that has a tremendous military ability. It's something every modern government has to deal with, and for her, it's shown right there in one person. There's a lot of symbolism in her. Also, you know a show is good when someone who bombs... What was he, Secretary Dorland? Yeah, Secretary Assistant Dorland. In front of his own daughter. Yeah, in front of his own daughter, it just, like, blows this dude up. And when she is shot, you feel something. Yeah. You want her to succeed. You know a show is good when you have such a conflict when she's shot. So I do think the show... I mean, that, to me, proved that it's a good show because of her story arc and what they did with her. It felt natural. It wasn't forced. A lot of times the show tells you how to feel. That was one of the times where it really stepped up and made you feel it.
All in all, yeah. She is probably... I don't know. It'd be really hard to choose my absolute favorite character, but she's probably in my top 3. She's really entertaining and fun to watch, so...
Yeah, I took note of her in episode 19, where she acted all kind of stereotypical cute anime style. There was one scene where she was literally just floating, and she had all cutesy hearts around her head, and she was doing like all this telepathy, speaking softly and all cute, trying to get all the men in the area to like listen to her or something. I found it really weird. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, you know, a few minutes later, she's got the glasses back on, and she's back to mean bitch. It's like, geez, complete parallel.
I love it, yeah.
And yeah, she's shot in like episode 26 or something, and I thought she was dead.
That's the point, right?
It's like not 19, 20 episodes later, it's revealed she's only been in a coma the whole time. Like, I thought she was dead.
Fuck, straight out of the soap opera.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's like an episode...
Un ex machina.
Yeah. It's an episode of Days of Our Lives. Days of Our Un. Anyway, finally done with characters an hour later. Okay. On to plot and theme, then.
Plot.
It's dry. I said it before. That's the word I'll use to describe it. It's very... They give you lots of information. It's lots of factions. There's lots of characters. There's lots of mech classes. The war isn't just 2 sides. That's what I mean by
that. It's like there's 5 sides. It's crazy.
There's a lot of groups, and all the groups interact in different ways. You have to keep up with it. You have to pay attention. The plot itself, it's good. It tells us it's the story it wants. It's trying to tell us the themes of, maybe we don't have to fight all the time. It's not bad about conveying it. It has too many romanticizing moments of death and suicide for my taste, but for the most part, it's not too bad. What do you guys think some of the major themes are in the show?
I know I've spotted a few. One is centralized versus decentralized power. Obviously, the Gundams being complete anarchist on the end of just not even having any communication with each other at the beginning, and very little in the way of instruction, are very decentralized in power, and Oz and Romefeller Foundation are extremely centralized. So they examine that quite a lot, and I believe the show advocates a bit more for decentralized power without completely condemning it or villainizing it. Centralized power, the way it's depicted, is villainous, but it's not completely monstrous. It's not without any merit whatsoever in the show. So again, it's another one of those situations where you, as the viewer, make up your own mind.
Yeah.
It does glorify self-sacrifice, and it slowly shows it to be sort of an oxymoron as you see the pilots attempt it more and more often, or contemplate it more and more often. It's shown to be ineffective and not something that will progress their goals, and I appreciate that. It starts off, you see Hiro doing this noble warrior sacrifice, standing defiantly, blowing himself up rather than losing, and then as it progresses, Catherine slaps the shit out of Troa for even thinking about it, and then Sandrock itself ejects Katra because only the machine needs to be kept out of enemy hands. And as it goes on, this idea of self-sacrifice is eroded. It's broken down, and eventually there's no part of it that remains noble or valuable to these pilots. I think almost inadvertently, it examines the use of military drones. That's a very modern problem, and the mobile dolls are 100% military drones.
Themes don't have to be purposeful, so yeah. So it definitely has those themes and ideas.
There's a major story arc about the use of essentially drone suits rather than manned suits, and I really couldn't understand any of the people trying to advocate against them. They didn't have good arguments, in my opinion. It was all this honorable bullshit.
Yeah, that's basically... It's so frustrating at times, the argument. You know.
Well, the thing is, there could have been good arguments against using them.
Autonomous drones could accidentally kill civilians, and we need to have human oversight of that. That's a valid argument. I could get behind that. I don't know if it justifies not using, automated drones at all, but it's just a very interesting concept. It's very interesting how bad they chose their arguments. For a show, for the most part, until they introduced the drones, you can relate to all the factions for the most part, for a good chunk of the time, until they start giving sloppy arguments with the drone stuff. At that point, you're just like, I can't agree with these guys. They're fighting, and they're not even giving good reasons for it. That's a failing in that regard, in my opinion. They dropped the ball on that. What do you think about the show's themes, Airhammer?
I was trying to make connections throughout the show. I believe at one point while we were watching, we compared Oz to Hydra from the Marvel Universe. And then I was taking the name itself, Oz, and for some reason trying to make connections to the Wizard of Oz. So,
oh, absolutely. We'll get to that in influences, but it's there.
Who was the wizard? Who was the Wicked Witch? Obviously, we had Dorothy, but she's not the central female character. Relina is. I almost feel like those names should have been swapped just for that connection alone.
There's definitely an influence, but... Well, what do you think about the central versus decentralized power? I kind of got a trail there, and didn't give you guys time to respond.
I don't know. I had a lot more connection with the characters than I did for the story, really. I look at everything that Trey's was attempting to do, and again, just really trying to follow what was his plan, and then looking at how each character, each colony, and how they were establishing themselves throughout the plot. And it's like, I don't know, I can't go too much depth into it.
I guess I'm at a lot of the same boat with Airhammer. Not necessarily they don't have anything to say on it, but just kind of on the spot.
Yeah, I'm still trying to understand the story. I guess that's my focus on the theme is at the start of almost every episode, you get kind of a recap of what's been happening within the last 5 or more episodes. So you're often reminded of the same thing with the same animation, and then they go right on into the episode. We learn that all of this is taking place in what they call the year after Colony 195. So
the entirety of the original 49 episodes takes place within one calendar year, I think is what is implied.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though there are time jumps.
Yeah. This is where I'm trying to figure out the story. It's that, okay, so the people of Earth created enough technology in order to leave the planet 195 years ago, and thus creating this new era, and they've all split up into colonies, which from what I can at least tell were all at peace until the Kushernada family began to develop this faction that was manipulating their way to the top and trying to cause a conflict in the middle. For what reason? It's like
power.
This is where it gets very confusing.
And another theme of the show is a lot of the people that want war have investments in there being war. We make money when there's war. Our company makes mechs. We can't make mechs to sell. People don't need to buy them for war, right? Yeah, in fact, at one point, one of the many times there's so-called peace, one space colony in particular said that they're going to try and retain peace while still making their main export, Gundams. Like, who are you going to sell them to? Like, how's that going to work?
The people that are going to invade you, that's who.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go off and...
Go ahead.
I'm going to criticize the show a couple places here. Paul, it makes war look way too clean and civil. A lot of the time, it focuses on our character pilots and very rarely shows people dying. In those cases, it's clean, it's honorable, it's noble. There's very little blood shown, which I assume is for the sake of Japanese television. But war looks too damn clean. It looks too victimless. It's not chaotic enough. I really didn't like how it was depicted. In the frame of politically, the wars are shown very well. But sometimes you need to see that orphaned child covered in mud in front of a burning house to really let it sink in who's affected and how long these people are going to suffer because of these military operations. I really didn't like how it was depicted in that sense. Another criticism I have is the storytelling method is very often tell rather than show. God bless the narrator for doing an amazing job, but I wish they would have shown more rather than told me. There were some pretty major events that just got glossed over in 1 or 2 minutes, even 30 seconds via the narrator.
Yep.
That could have been built up to and shown. They know how to write a show. They can do this very well. There's so many elements, so many events that they portrayed very well. They could have done better for the others. And also it tends to tell you how to feel about a lot of the moments, and that really doesn't fly for me. Don't tell me how to feel. It will just make me pissed at the show in general. I can't empathize if you tell me how to feel. Another criticism I have is, in the end, when all is said and done, all the terrorism, the murders, all the war crimes go off without being on trial. And that really bothers me. I understand that after such a miserable, terrible war, people need to move on and forgive, but characters like Lady Un should have been on trial, and if nothing else, been legally pardoned. Characters like Hiro and Duo should have been on trial for all the military bases they destroyed and pardoned for their commitment to peace and their ability to help end the conflict. There should have been something other than just like, okay, no, you just all walk away scot-free. That bothered me quite a lot.
Especially with Lady Un. She's legitimately a war criminal.
Yeah. In fact, Katra as well. Under the influence of the Zero system, Katra does destroy an entire colony. He just takes out that double beam saber and blows it up. And that haunts him, but it's not shown enough that it haunts him. Now for some praise.
Okay.
It allows you to question the protagonist's decision. There are a lot of shows where they insist upon you being on the side of their protagonist all the way through, and this one very rarely does that. Only a few junctions does the show insist that you side with the heroes.
Yeah, and at least in the early part of the show, I found it really easy to relate with at least one or two characters on each side. So yeah, it's really cool to be able to understand the people who are against your heroes, and you don't always have to side with the main good guys. And a lot of shows don't do that well.
That's a hallmark of the Gundam franchise.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the highlights of the show, that so many characters are multi-dimensional. But yeah, anything else to say on the plot and theme?
I don't know, I kind of hogged it. I feel like you guys deserve some time to speak on this.
There's a lot of things I like about the theming in the show. I know as much as they try to push peace, they do have some good arguments for, why war might be necessary sometimes. Hey, sometimes other countries are just fucking, super aggro, aggressive fucking warmongers, and you gotta protect yourself. You gotta fucking defend yourself. Like, even Relena, who's super hardcore pacifist, comes around and realizes, hey, you gotta protect yourself at some point. That's good. I like that.
I agree. I think a lot of times they choose wantingly to not oversimplify things. A good example is how many different factions come out of the main Earth faction. It begins as the United Earth Sphere Alliance, and then a extremist group from within it with a lot of independent funding. The Oz organization sets up a coup to take over. Now Oz is in control of the Earth. Within Oz, the Rockefeller Foundation is more official now, and then Oz splits off eventually into two groups: Oz,
and the
backed by Rockefeller, and the Trace faction. Rockefeller puts down the Trace faction, and in the upheaval, Relena Peacecraft is brought in to be a representative. She ends up being a political mastermind and turns their entrapment against them and promotes her own peace. She turns the Rockefeller Oz organization, as strict as it is on the colonies, into a complete world government, completely peaceful for Earth, and achieves that goal, at least on Earth itself, if not the colonies. And then the colonies end up rising up with an extremist group of their own, the White Fang, to counteract. That is extremely complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Extraordinarily complicated. Because I didn't even go over the fact that the Earth Sphere was going to start acting with more peace, and then the Gundams were tricked by Oz into assassinating those peaceful leaders. No, there's so much more to this. That was the super abridged version, and they didn't have to go through all that trouble. They could have had at least one of those steps removed. They could have had two of those steps removed, to be honest, but they didn't. They went through all the trouble of making it as complicated as real politics, and allowing you to still follow on.
Yeah. It's kind of the complexity, as much as of it is, because I'll admit, I enjoyed a lot of things about the show. It's not one of my favorites, and I think part of that is because of where I was when I watched it. I firmly believe the type of mindset you're in when you sit down to watch and enjoy a show can affect how much you enjoy it or what you think about it. And I spent a lot of time working while watching this show, and it was just not something I could sit down and digest. So that complexity works wonders in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it worked against it. Just a thought on that.
Now it's time to talk about influences, inspirations, and references. I think one of the big ones here is obviously World War II, and specifically D-Day. Yeah, Let's be honest, the giant showdown at the end of the series between Earth and the colonies, with so many soldiers, hordes of soldiers on both sides, large bases, this imposing superweapon, that was absolutely an allegory to World War II. In fact, they even mention it a couple times as the war to end all wars, which I can't tell you how much that is entrenched in. It's
that's kind of neat parallel.
An obvious allegory.
Yeah, I was going to go for the, I guess it's a sister influence with the source for its White Fang faction name shares the same inspiration or influence as where Ruby got its name for the White Fang. The naming of the White Fang groups in both those shows are a reference to the novel White Fang by Jack London. Yeah, I have no idea the premise of the book, but yeah, that's apparently what they're based off of.
Aaron mentioned this earlier, and The Wizard of Oz is definitely an influence, at least for themes, if not actual content. I know a lot of The Wizard of Oz has been taken to represent political ideas. I don't think there's a direct connection there, but we do have Dorothy who lives in her own military dream world that is not at all reality. The mobile dolls could be seen as Tin Men. The Rockefeller Foundation is probably a representative of the Cowardly Lion, and I think Trey's is meant to be the wizard with his great big presence as an illusion, while he in the background is actually playing all the sides and appearing more grand than he really is.
Interesting.
I don't know all the references. I don't know if it's a one-to-one thing, but they definitely bring it up. In fact, if you look at the Oz military logo on a lot of the sleeves, I believe there's a Tin Woodsman on that logo. So the Wizard of Oz is definitely an influence. I don't think it's an allegory to 1890s American politics. I'm pretty sure that's removed, but they do use a lot of the ideas and motifs. I think there's a lot of Western Gundam influences come directly from Gundam Wing, because this is the first show we got in the West that was made public, that was dubbed in our own language, that was on TV in prime time, that targeted the right audience at the time. It really can't be stated enough that anytime someone here in North America thinks of Gundam, Gundam Wing is right there at the top of the list because of how influential it was, because of its time and place. It hit in the Cartoon Network Toonami Block, the perfect time in that, because that was red hot at the time, and it really struck a chord with a lot of people, more so here in the West than it did even in Japan.
I think it had a lot of things going for it. It had, you mentioned the Toonami Block, right? And it happened to be right at that time where anime is becoming less of an obscure thing here in the West. And it was one of the first ones that a lot of people were brought into that had a lot more of adult themes, a darker, serious tone. It's not a shonen.
I would say it's not for kids.
Yeah.
I think it was targeted more at the teenage audience. I don't think a kid would really get a lot out of a lot of these episodes. Most of them are talking. It's very political. If it wasn't for giant robot battles, this would be a snooze even for most teenagers.
Yeah, I would say it was the Super Deformed series that came out that were more directed towards kids.
Yeah, and G Gundam was more the shonen series.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those aired in the United States and Canada after Gundam Wing. This show is referenced heavily through the Gundam franchise. It's the first one to splinter off, so of course they're going to have a lot of common threads. I mentioned earlier that Zex and Char both wear that helmet. Noin has a representative from the original Gundam show. As I said, Char is a parallel to Zex. Char also has a female companion. There's a lot of original Gundam references here. I don't get them all. I haven't seen all of Gundam 78, but
I was going along the same lines. I think that some of the generic mechs might be generic mechs that were used in other series as well as vice versa. I know, like, the Wing Gundam, Wing Zero, makes a cameo in the background of one of the other shows, and I'm assuming stuff like that happens in reverse as well.
Probably.
But yeah, this is a case of it's such a big universe, none of us are super knowledgeable on it, right? So, like, there's just so much this stuff that's just going to go over our head. So
what I am knowledgeable about is the spiritual successor to this show, Gundam 00, which obviously Gundam 0, Gundam 00 should be obvious what that's meant to be. It's not a sequel, but it carries along a lot of the same ideas and themes, almost the same technology level, same concept of colonies versus Earth sort of thing. It does a lot of the same ideas better, in my opinion. It's definitely worth a watch if you enjoyed Wing.
Through the process of this podcast, we're definitely going to watch more Gundam shows. I don't know if I'll ever sit down and try to watch them all, but I look forward to watching more, and I want to see how they bounce off each other. After watching some of the other shows, if I revisit Gundam, if thoughts on it will have changed at all.
I think most of the shows from what I've seen are very dry and serious like this. Not a lot of the out-of-continuity ones really fall out of that. The Super Deformed one and G Gundam being the by far most notable I can think of. Another influence that came out of Gundam Wing is the album cover and even a lot of the art from the band Linkin Park for the Reanimation album. Linkin Park is a extremely influential band, and Gundam Wing absolutely influenced that album cover. That basically is Nataku with an insect motif and a Zaku head. The chest is without a doubt Nataku. So there you go. Little cultural influence. And that's just within the first few years of it being released. It's been nearly 20 since then. So Gundam Wing has had a trickle-down effect here in the West, and I can't wait to start spotting a lot of those references in other shows.
And there's I can't think of the name of it off my top of my head, but another obvious influence is, what is the name of that mech show that starts with an M? One of the granddaddies of fucking mech shows.
God, I can't pronounce it. Mangazurzi? Mangazurzi?
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's obviously influence.
Oh, I'm so bad at pronouncing that name. I know exactly what it is. I've never been able to pronounce it properly. I apologize.
Yeah, that's definitely something worth mentioning here in influences.
Yeah, that is absolutely an influence for the Gundam franchise in general. It's hard to say what influenced Gundam Wing specifically that didn't influence the rest of the franchise. As this is a oddball spin-off, it does probably have other influences that don't influence the Universal Century shows. But man, that's being very nitpicky, and I don't think we have the know-how to really pick those apart with a fine-tooth comb the way we would want to. Also, on another note, I mentioned earlier how the fan fiction community is notorious. I've heard stories, haven't experienced this myself, but I've heard stories of fangirls of this show not even having seen the show and just liking the characters enough, or having never finished the show and just making slash fiction of the protagonists because they are a bunch of beautiful boys, and that's what the ladies like. Which I don't know what you would expect making a teen-based show. You know, something obviously aimed at teenagers.
It's a rule of fandom that any show with like more than like 3 or 4 major male characters are going to have lots of slash fiction.
For this one, it is especially notorious. I'll put it this way. Within my research for what was influenced by Gundam Wing, I came across within 2 search pages on Google a crossover fanfiction of Gundam Wing and Harry Potter. That
does not surprise me at all.
2 pages. I guess the bottom line here is that it influenced a lot of people to be creative with their writing.
Yeah, it's good. If a show, whether it be weird slash fiction or not, if a show inspires you to write, if those shows drive you to a creative place and get you writing, a lot of the times, not always, but often enough, a lot of times that starts off people doing other creative stuff. Whether or not they continue writing is not always the case, but I like when stuff moves people to such a place that they want to create their own content off of it. So, I'm glad. Weird, creepy slashiness aside, I'm glad it exists. I'm glad there's a lot of Gundam Wing fanfiction going around. Touched enough people to make it a thing.
Touched enough people. Nice choice of words.
Yeah. I noticed. I realized what I said immediately after I said it. So, hence the pause. Anyway, finally move on out of influences.
Yeah, let's go ahead and tend to the septic tank of this show, localization. I've had to bite my tongue a few times throughout the show, but this show has one of the worst dubs I've ever encountered, especially for the quality of the actual narrative, for the notoriety of the show. I was shocked at how bad this dub was, and let me clarify that it is not the voice talent. It is
the majority of the time it's not voice talent. There are some bad voices,
There's a couple of bad, especially the bit.
But every show, I will give you that every show has those.
It has a terrible script. I went to watch a couple of the episodes in subtitles just to make sure that we're not looking at a massive quality gap. And honestly, I couldn't tell much of a difference. I didn't memorize the script, but to me it felt like the text on screen was on par with the words I was hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just a terrible script. It's written as if a space alien was trying to approximate how human beings act and didn't quite succeed. When we mentioned how many characters were very human, that's because how many characters don't act human.
Yeah.
It's bad.
I think part of the issue with the localization might have how they translated it, both for the dub and the subtitles. They translated it very literally, it sounds like, and between languages like that, the way people talk, the way people express ideas and thoughts and structure their ideas and thoughts in other languages isn't quite the same. I mean, there are parallels, but they're still structured differently. And if you just do a straight translation, it's going to seem really weird and stiff and just out of place. Just people don't talk like that.
It definitely shows in the dialogue when you're watching a particular character do a line and they are translating word for word, so you're having this character do a line in English, but you are trying to fit the whole thing as if the character is mouthing it in Japanese. So in the original, you'll have a fluid sentence, but in the English, the actor has to slow down to make everything fit while the character is moving its mouth. And they could have just sped up the animation to make it fit, but they don't. So your voice actor has to do this line awkwardly, and it makes the character just seem very out of place.
Oh, no. It's not the lip flaps. I can confirm. I was looking and checking for that. It's not the lip flaps. They edited those to match the dialogue.
Really?
Great job on it. Yeah.
And really, it's just... I think you pointed out this, Dais, at one point while we were watching. It's almost as if the actors were only given, like... They're like, okay, here's your script, record. Okay, you recorded, we're done. Right? Like, it's and other shows... Yeah. And other shows, you're like... Okay, here is what you're going to be saying. Here's what you're going to be, here's your thoughts and emotional, like, this is what you're going on in the story. We need you to put yourself in this position. Ah, man, that one seems too cheery. Redo it. Oh, that one, it sounds like you're supposed to be happy here. Why does it sound like you're reading a eulogy? Cheer up some. You know what I mean? Like, you get direction.
What you're describing is the voice director.
Yeah.
Who definitely takes some of the blame for this, because we know they had good talent. A lot of their talent went on to do amazing things. A lot of their talent was already doing amazing things. The voice talent was not to blame for this. They performed admirably. It was the lines they were given. An example I have is Catra, because, man, Catra got some of the shittiest lines in this. At one point, people who are kind people are the ones crying in space. What? What the fuck? Catra, that's not even a sentence structure in, like, what?
Yeah, it's pretty damn bad.
No, it's worse than that. I took it easy on it. It happens so often. It's so unnatural. I felt bad watching this because I knew how good those lines were delivered or could have been delivered. I knew how bad those lines were written. It was painful. I don't know whether it was bad voice direction, a really rushed schedule. I don't know if it was a lack of good translating where they didn't decide to make the lines more natural. I don't know if it was apathy on the part of the people translating it. I don't know if it was too strict oversight from Sunrise that they had to stick to a very, very literal script and didn't understand. But one way or another, this script was a disaster.
I'm going to say answer F, all of the above, probably. Like, a mixture. Like...
Maybe so.
Crap.
I just don't understand how they could be so accurate and consistent with details. Be so lovingly careful not to mix up any voices, not to mix up any names, to keep pronunciations, places, times, people, have all that be so accurate, so on point, and then this dialogue be so bad. I cannot reconcile that in my mind in any way. Another thing that really deserves mention is that in a war show with a lot of large battles between faceless robots, usually automatons, you can always tell one side from the other. Even with the revolving door of villainous organizations, you can always tell one side from the other. That takes skill. Yeah, I definitely appreciated that.
All the little factions have their own stormtroopers, if you will. Their own little...
They're usually the same suits, but the use of color variation, swapping color for another, you can always tell which side is which. It's never confusing. Nice. It should be confusing by all accounts,
and all
but
the
it's not.
And an extension of that is all the main mechs, love them or hate them, are all distinctive and Englishly easily distinguishable. So I like that little detail too, and they're all beautiful to look at. Like I love the art design of the mechs in the show. They're all good, or the main five at least, and Toggies. But
honestly, my favorite suit is the Virgo mobile doll. So I appreciate even the ones that aren't the main suits. I think the Virgo, it's the one with the little like force field generators, but there's only 3 on the shoulder, and it's got the underslung arm cannon. that's just a cool utilitarian design. It looks military. It looks like it means business. Even those have a lot of visual appeal.
Everything's visually appealing, and it's nice. It's all in order, no errors. The animation is one of the strongest points of the entire show.
One thing I didn't notice, and that I was kind of looking out for partly, but I just didn't see, maybe you guys can help me, was there any real use of color as sort of a visual indicator or anything? Airhammer, I know you're very artistic, especially when it comes to color. Did you notice like any color themes or anything pop up? Because I was looking for it a little on the slide, but it didn't really come up to me in any way that I noticed used.
Fade to sepia.
That was a good use of color, yeah.
It happens a couple times. For reference to people who haven't seen the show, I think it happens like maybe 2 or 3 times in the show. I know Raylena gets one, and Trez?
Yeah, Trez gets one.
Those 2 for sure, and I think there might be another one. It's almost kind of like, here is a major turning point in this character's story arc. We're gonna like freeze frame on them and fade to like an old-timey picture filter on it.
It's like a pencil sketch in sepia tone. It's really a weird visual element that only pops up a few times. But yeah, you've got a good point. That is definitely something that I think if it was in pure black and white, it wouldn't have the same visual impact.
I interpreted it as like trying to like, here's a major turning point in this character's story arc. That's what it seemed to happen every time. So that was kind of a neat little visual thing they did.
I guess the only real use of color I can think of is the mobile dolls used by White Fang were black, and I suppose that was meant to represent their ties to space. I can only guess. Maybe it was just the only time they had to use, and they were like, okay, well, these guys are the villains of the moment, so let's use black.
Black's evil. Contrasts with their name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Color was the one thing that I felt like was underutilized in the visuals, but even then, all the designs are gorgeous.
Yeah. What's your favorite mech, Airhammer?
Oh, that one's always stirring in my head. I remember when we talked about this before. I believe Death Scythe was my favorite, but sometimes I go more towards either Wing Zero or Heavy Arms because they're also cool.
Yeah, no, I think I'm in the same boat as you. Like, it's really hard to choose my favorite. I really like Heavy Arms as well. Wing and Wing Zero are both cool. There's so many cool ones. Tall Geese is pretty cool.
Like we mentioned already, we've gone through inspiration and such. I guess maybe Heavy Arms would be my favorite then, as I can think of a variety of Transformers that have had like similar weaponry and how they are depicted with them.
You thinking of Rhinox?
Yes, Rhinox is definitely up there among others. Yeah, we're eventually going to get to Beast Wars.
Hopefully sooner than later.
Yes.
I like all the designs. I also really like Epion. Man, Epion is cool. I know that's another one. Red is used to show Epion. I guess that's another callback to Char, because Char always used a red version of mobile suits in the original Gundam. It doesn't matter what color it is. It's just a badass design.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Epion's pretty cool. I don't know. I don't know if he's one of my favorites, but all the mechs, even the ones I don't really care for, they look cool.
Yeah.
At least. Yeah.
The only one I actively dislike is can't remember the name of it. It's the one with the pointy hat, the space suit.
Yeah, I'm visualizing it.
Noin Tribe's one that's white.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot remember the name for my life.
Ares. It's an astrological sign.
Yeah, well, that's most of the mobile suits. I guess that's another thing. A lot of the suits.
Leo? Was it Leo?
I think Leo's the ground one, but a lot of the suits and military hardware are named after astrological symbols, including the Libra space station.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was ground mech as well.
But regardless, I can't remember the specific type, but that's the only one I actively dislike.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but yeah. Want to move on?
Let's talk about the sound and music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the music in general is this jazzy synth 90s poppy kind of sound paired with this orchestral score. It is really, really good stuff. I personally don't think the vocals really match the songs that well. The vocals are fine, but I don't feel like they're paired up with the songs that they're sung within that well. But man, just excellent music all around.
The vast majority of the music I really love. The intro and outros I like, mostly indifferent to compared to the rest, but it's not horrible. The only real music that I didn't really care for is a few times where they have random Japanese song that they incorporated with lyrics playing over dialogue. It happens at least once. I can't remember what episode, but it frustrated me. It's a little thing. But for the most part, the sound direction is sublime. Every character, at least the main five and Zex and Treyas as well, they have their own character thing. And so, like, they play when you see them in battle, and a lot of the times they'll, like, transition and, like you'll see Hiro on screen and he's fighting shit and they'll be playing Hiro's theme and it will fade out and, like, within the next few seconds it will transition into the next person who's fighting against theme or who's fighting with theme. It all meshes well together. It's all made to work well together, and therefore it does. The tracks blend into each other really well, and it really hypes up and builds the battles because that's where it really focuses on the music. Yes, there's other music that plays during sad moments or during the political events, but the most iconic, memorable music, at least for the main show, the main focus for when they use music is the dramatic battles, right? The fights, the actual mechs fucking ripping each other apart, fucking blowing each other up and unleashing their entire arsenal to blow up a fucking military base or whatever the hell they're doing. The violent parts is where they use the really upbeat, heavy, that synth that you're talking about. That's where they use it. Mm-hmm. And it fits really nice. I don't know, just something I noticed. What are your guys' like favorite parts of the music and sound?
Amazing soundtrack. Yeah. I would say the main theme of the series, Just Communication, was stood out the most to me. For the movie, we have White Reflection, which is very good. There were a couple of songs, I don't know their actual titles, that I heard in the main show, which always kind of pumped me up for the scene. And then the little 3 to 4 second tune that we would hear in the bumper for the commercial. I love that little bit. If it's part of a larger song, I would love to hear it, but just that little bit gets you going, like, oh, right, the show's back. What's happening?
Yeah, honestly, until you guys were talking just now, I had forgotten the show has a second opening that's only around for about 10 episodes. It just doesn't stay long enough for you to feel like it's part of the show. I always expected Just Communication and was surprised every single time this showed up. We had gone through 30 some odd 40 episodes of one intro, and then at the last minute they switch it out on us. Poorly timed on their part, because it was a fine intro visually and audio, fine song, great visuals. I just couldn't connect to that one. I think my favorite song is definitely Just Communication. If there's an instrumental version of it, all the better, because again, don't feel like the vocals match the song as well as I would have liked.
I'm very certain I could find a karaoke version. Japan does that a lot.
Yeah. As it stands, I typically listen to songs with vocals in a language that I don't comprehend, as if the singer was another instrument, a lead instrument. And in this case, her voice just felt like it was not jiving with this song. She's a fine singer, just didn't feel like it connected well for me. Like if you took that and played a jazz trumpet on top of it, I don't think that would fit either, no matter how good the musician was. And that's the same situation here. I just don't feel like the vocals fit the songs as well as I would have liked. But that's my personal opinion.
Interesting thing about Just Communication, it is one of the few tracks where the music itself was made by a different person.
Well, they did a great job.
Yeah, it's really good. It's good. Yeah, I just thought I'd point that out. But yeah,
I think from the music we can speak a bit about the sound effects. They use a lot of stock sound effects, but man, do they use them well. There's some love in those sound effects. Everything sounds great to me. I recognize a lot of those sound effects from contemporary video games of the time, so I'm actually nostalgic for the sound effects. So I am absolutely biased towards these. I love them. They're good.
The sound effects aren't the major driving home selling point of the show for me, for like compared to like the art and the music, but it's not bad. There's never a weirdly inappropriate sound when a mech is blown up. It's they always sound appropriate. When the mechs are fucking shooting and blowing each other up and slashing each other, or buildings being blown up, or whatever's happening, the sound effects fit and feel real for the situation. They don't feel out of place. Or sound effects are one of those things where if it's done well, you really shouldn't notice it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, none of them jumped out, but man, they were all good. When I heard them, I liked what I heard. I think it's time to move on to the voice cast. And then,
Oh, yes.
with this localization, with this dialogue, what a mixed bag. Wonderful performers doing things that were not wonderful, things that we know they're better than. I'm going to start out and say the narrator is one of the unsung heroes of the show. Awesome performance. Most of his dialogue was brief, but most of it was very, very well done. I can only think of one instance of the narrator's lines being a little bad, where they should have done another take, but even then, it was one of the best parts of the entire show.
I don't find the structure of the show's narrative that great, the way, it told the story via narration. But the only saving grace about that whole situation is the fact they got the narrator they did, because without him, it would have been just a train wreck, I feel.
Yeah, the narrator's played by Campbell Lane. Wonderful job. Dais and I know him as a certain crab who we will see again in a future show.
My favorite crab.
Crab?
We have a star-studded...
crab.
A crab.
Beast Wars?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, it was an easy guess, okay?
Yeah. See, you're already getting it, man. You're already getting it.
Yeah, we have a star-studded cast for this show. Most of them were already established in other series prior to Gundam Wing. If you haven't seen Gundam Wing, you have heard these voices in something or another. As I would say, almost all of the voice actors that are doing voices for the main characters have been in something related to Transformers or Dragon Ball in some way. So yeah, we have Mark Hildreth, Scott McNeil, Kirby Morrow, Brad Swale, Ted Cole, Brian Drummond, David Kay, Lisa Ann Bailey, Anuka Akuma, and the Richard Newman and Saffron Henderson. The list can go on.
So here's a question for you guys: is the fact that so many you mentioned that so many voice actors from this show has so many crossovers with Dragon Ball and Transformers, is that because they're the best at their job and like they're highly sought out after, or is it because like there are so few people doing anime at the time?
Oh man, that's a loaded question.
Ooh.
I think it's a combination of both. Definitely back then, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were a lot less voice actors. The industry has absolutely exploded nowadays to the point where no show really needs to have the same voice actor as any other show. You could have one person cast for the rest of his life, and that's the one thing he did. However, these actors are really good. These are people that have been around. Scott McNeil has been around for I don't know how many years before this, doing all kinds of crazy roles. I know him as Link from basically all of the American cartoons of Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Bros. Super Show and Captain N.
Mm-hmm.
You probably know him as Dr. Wily and Proto Man from the Mega Man cartoon. That's Scott McNeil. Like I mentioned earlier, he's a living legend, and he's just one of this cast. There's so many people that have been doing this at this point. Some people just have the talent. So I don't know. It's kind of a loaded question. It's probably a full-on episode to get into the world of voice acting. I would say at this point they knew they had a high budget, and they probably wanted to put the money into good acting.
Okay.
And for the most part, they got it.
Yeah, at this point in time, a lot of shows were having their voice recordings done in Vancouver, Canada. So many of these programs would have the same actors.
Yeah,
which is
so
why
Hollywood
these
of
ones,
Hollywood of voices.
and all of these they meld so well together. And yeah, like I said, if you haven't watched this show, you're definitely going to pick out the actors right away. Like when I'm watching Gundam Wing and I hear Duo, I'm hearing Proto Man. When I hear Troa, I'm hearing Goku, and so forth and so forth. And then when you look up the voice cast and you're seeing what they have been doing or still doing, like, you got Anuka Okuma, who's doing Lady Un. You'll know her from the past as Android 18. However, in current time, she's playing Rhodonite, who is one of the newest gems featured on Steven Universe.
Huh, neat.
Mm.
Suffice to say that despite how god-awful the script is and how they probably took one take or threw away all the good takes, the cast is good. They've proven their worth in other works, and I think without this cast, the dub would be unbearable.
Fair enough. I feel like a little disadvantage in this topic because I like I said, I haven't watched tons and tons and tons of these shows that these guys might have been in. The only one I really recognize is I mean, of course, I recognize the characters you guys are referencing from Dragon Ball Z, but I haven't seen tons of Dragon Ball Z, so I don't. The only one
Would
I
it
really
help you?
Go ahead.
Would it help you if you thought of Duo saying "Excuse me, princess"? Is that?
It does a little bit. Now it's in my head. Earlier, it was actually one of the very few that you guys pointed out to me that I really couldn't unhear after you pointed out is Trowa and Goku.
Yeah.
That's the one, but probably because Goku's the voice from Dragon Ball Z I'm most familiar with. But even then, the effect didn't last long for me because I'm just not that familiar with their voices.
I'm such a non-fan of Dragon Ball Z. I never once heard that. I never picked up Goku. Yeah, no, I do not care for Dragon Ball Z. But we'll get to that in another episode.
Yeah, as we watch more shows, you're going to be picking out the characters over and over.
Yeah. It's like,
all right, so to recap, we tore apart the localization and just felt sad about it. We gushed on the art and visuals, and now we're gushing on the sound, music, and voice acting. Is it time to cover this completely, move on, or do we have more to say?
Fine to move on.
Mm-hmm.
All right, then. Should we move directly on to supplemental media?
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and say it. Endless Waltz is part of this show. It's part of the narrative. You really shouldn't skip it.
Yeah, it is. For people who are familiar with this type of thing, a lot of shows have movies that are like just here's the epilogue, and I guess that Endless Waltz is that way in a way, but at the same time, none of the story is really summed up until the end of Endless Waltz.
It's essentially episodes 50, 51, and 52.
Yeah. But that being said, there is supplemental media. There's a series of mangas. I don't know the topics of all of them, but they're like kind of prologue stuff. Like one of them deals with Trowa's backstory before he took on his Trowa personality, who he was beforehand, and shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
They all seem kind of interesting. I might dip into them at some point.
As I understand, the production errors and issues that caused episodes 27 and 28 to be those shitty clip shows were meant to be flashbacks that covered some, if not all, of the episode 0 prequel manga, but that obviously did not get to be in the show. So as it is, it's bonus content for the manga. Also, there were some OVAs called... they were titled Operation Meteor that just recap the show in a better version of a clip show. I haven't seen them, but I really couldn't recommend it. I think this show has too many moving parts, too many details to really comprehend in a short format like that. I don't think it would really be that enjoyable. Maybe I'm wrong, but I can't imagine how it would be enjoyable.
Yeah, I did a little bit of research into it. It seemed like it's just recap. I was curious about checking into it, and I might in the future to see if there's any actual new material in them.
There was also a novel, picture novel, I'm not exactly sure what format it was, in 2010 called Frozen Teardrop. It was meant to be a sequel several decades after the events of Endless Waltz, and it covers the Gundam pilots, their families, their children. Really interesting topic, but as I understand it was not seen very well by fans. I haven't actually had a chance to look at this myself, but honestly I feel like Endless Waltz ended it so well, I'm not sure I want this.
Yeah, I'm curious what they could have gone on beyond that, right? Like, are they gonna demilitarize yet again? You know, at the end of the 49 episodes, they're like, okay, we're going to launch our mechs into the sun and demilitarize, and and then they undo all that by, going and fetching their mechs out of the sun. Are they just going to undo the undoing of the undoing again in these, like, you know what I mean? Are they just going to, like...
I don't even know. I couldn't even guess to the content of this. The story felt complete at the end of Endless Waltz.
Yeah.
And I don't know what a glimpse of the future would look like. It feels like it wouldn't be the same story.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how much that intrigues me. I mean, I might look into it just to see what it is, but I'm not super drawn to it at the moment. But other than that, in supplemental media, I'm sure, there's obviously other little tidbits of manga and anime I'm sure I'm missing. But there's also a couple video games. I know there's a
there was one on
fighting game on the Super Nintendo.
Yep, Endless Duel. It was Japan exclusive. Endless Duel. It's a fighting style. Each of the main characters has kind of a campaign mode where they go through each character and their particular mech. I did link one video to us before that was Hiro's campaign. I'm not really sure how the game is meant to end. I didn't go through it all.
Yeah, they had, what was it, Noino and not the Mercurius, the V8 for some reason. That was really weird to me. Other than the Super Famicom game, there's also a PlayStation 1 game. This one actually did get released in North America because by then the show was actually airing over here.
There was a second game on the PlayStation that came out in 2002. It's called The Battle.
Also, a great many of the Gundams make appearances in other various video games. Lots of cameos, lots of mecha games that combine lots of genres.
There's some, I can't remember the name of it exactly because it's, mostly Japanese, but there's a long-running series of Japanese strategy games that cross over Gundam, all the variations of Gundam, including Gundam Wing. That Metzinger thing we talked about earlier, and a couple other of the big mech staples. But yeah, what's important here is Gundam. They all get crossed over, and I guess that kind of counts as supplemental media.
Yeah, if they cameo in a video game, I'd call it supplemental. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's Gundam Dynasty Warriors, in which lots of franchises of Gundams cross over. But as far as specific to Gundam Wing, just the Super Famicom and PlayStation 1 games.
Yep. Those are the only two specific to Gundam Wing that I could find as well.
Yep. There was a lot of merchandise for this show. I guess you could almost say, almost kind of like Pokemon. If it existed, it had a Gundam variation of it.
Body pillows.
Anything. Gundam was big, and it's still going.
Yeah, there's still a lot of shows. I know this is dipping outside of the scope of the podcast, but one thing about Gundam as a whole as a franchise, Gundam itself apparently has lots of distribution issues. It's really hard to get.
It does.
Yeah.
Sadly, Bandai and Sunrise don't really put a lot of effort into keeping things available for the North American audience.
Yeah. There's some shows that were just never translated, and others that were translated that you just can't get on DVD anymore, that's the real shame. When stuff has been translated, the work has already been done. You just can't get it anymore. They just don't make it. There's no reason they can't. They have to. They can.
Thankfully, Wing is one of those shows that you can get.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Thankfully, yeah.
And through that, I'm sure a lot of people are very happy.
Anyway, I guess finally time to wrap this up, or did you have anything else to say? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
On to final thoughts.
Yeah. I led into the episode. Anyone else want to lead out the outro? How about you, Airhammer? You've talked so very little.
But that's my thing. I'm the strong silent type of this group.
Oh, okay. I guess that worked out because both Airhammer...
You're not as silent as Dwayne. I mean, he doesn't say anything in any of our episodes. He doesn't even introduce himself. We don't have a picture of him. Dwayne's just there.
You weren't supposed to even reference him. Fuck.
Okay, so final thoughts. So my initial viewing, I was 17 when it came out on television. It was definitely the most mature anime at the time, and then watching it now, which would be my first viewing since, I would say it probably doesn't hold up as much. It still has an amazing voice cast, but it's not as exciting as it was then. Endless Waltz is probably where it picks up a bit because, like I said, I enjoyed more of the first half of the series more than the second. And then Endless Waltz is just this very nice cap off to the show. It's still entertaining. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good show. I did enjoy this. It wasn't up to the standards that the later shows I had seen had set, but it was great to watch. It was great to finally see this. as you had watched it on Toonami, I kind of missed out on it. I'd seen a few scattered episodes, but man, you can't miss 5 minutes of this, much less a full episode. There was no way for busy teenage me to keep up with this.
Yeah.
And I am very happy to finally get it seen, to get it out of the way. I don't know for sure if I could recommend it unless you're a hardcore fan. I think if you're a hardcore fan of other Gundam series, you're almost obligated to watch this. But as good as it is, I think the clunky storytelling and the very bad script hold it back. I enjoyed it, but I can't recommend it.
First and foremost, I'm glad to have experienced the show. I like watching new stuff for the sake of having watched it, so I can catch references to it in other stuff or enjoy it when it inevitably comes out with a crossover with something else I really love, right? So yeah, there's that. Let's get that out of the way. I'm glad to have watched it. It's not one of my favorites. I'm going to go out and flat say that right now. There's a lot about things about the show I really love. The music, obviously. I love everything about the music, from the titles to the way it's used. So yeah, there's that. But there's a lot of it I just can't get behind. It's just not necessarily that it's bad. It's just not something I'm looking for in a show, especially right now. I know, and that might not be fair to the show as a whole, but it's a very real situation. You kind of have to take this type of stuff.
You alluded to that earlier. Why don't you go ahead and explain that for the listeners? Because what you're looking for in a show right now is something much lighter than this. Yeah, and this being such a dense, heavy show definitely had an impact on you and how you viewed it. I think that is an anecdote worth recounting.
Yeah, so I talked about it a little bit earlier. While I was viewing this show, I was under a lot of heavy stress at work, constantly into overtime, constantly doing like double shifts or doing solo shifts, or working 7 days before I get a single day off and then doing it again. And I would come home exhausted and tired, and I don't like to think about it this way, and it kind of is a shame that it kind of slipped into this way. Sometimes I'd come home and I'd want to watch something light and fluffy and happy. Like, the regular show was great for that, right? This, not so much. And sometimes it felt like work, and that's a shame. I don't want to come home from work and do more work. And that kind of hurt my personal own view on the show. I tried to be as unbiased as possible and I think I was kind of fair to it. But yeah, that's definitely, it's something you have to take into account, right? When you watch something like that and you spend a long time watching it, your interpretation of it is going to be tinted. Whether a lot or a little, it's going to be tinted about what the hell you're doing in life at the moment, how you enjoy the show, how you consume the show. If you consume it every fucking night after you come home from a miserable, long, grueling day at work, you're going to have no choice but to associate it with coming home and grueling work. And it's going to be hard to focus on it. And you can't do that with a super condensed, dry, serious show like that. It's just, for me, it wasn't a good mesh. But that said, I'm glad I've watched it. I did enjoy lots of segments of it. I liked watching the robots fight and blow up each other, and I liked the music and the art. Yeah, I'm glad I experienced it. I look forward to checking out more and seeing how it compares. But yeah, for now, it was an okay show. I'm glad I watched it. So what do you guys, how do you want to go out on this one?
I don't even know how to go out on this one. This is, I guess we just go out. Thank you guys for listening. You've been a wonderful audience. We are Animated Indulgence. And I hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as we enjoyed making it.
Bye-bye.